church we go all back? Is there a youth church? There is no youth church.
I can never tell.
It's not on.
It's not.
Don't ask me, I'm turned on.
Turn him off.
I know, right?
It's called
Okay, I think I'm on now.
You're on.
You're on now.
Yeah. All right. I can virtually never tell. It's like the speakers are in front of me, so I just naturally think that I have that loud of a voice, you know. It just carries. Super loud. But it works a lot better with mine, so I'm glad that it's on. So I wanted to start with a question, sort of a scenario. How many of you have ever experienced the I promise I'll never do it again kind of situation?
Do it again.
I had to put up 2 hands.
Yeah. Maybe you were the person who said I promise I'll never do it again, and then like a week later you did it again.
Yep.
Or maybe you were a parent and your kid promised I'll never do it again, and then they did it again. So I talked to my mom about it. Apparently I was just a really good kid. I never made those kinds of promises. Those were her words, not mine.
I'm going to need your mom's phone number on that one.
All right, I will give it to you after church. You can call her. I called her and I was like, Mom, did I ever have one of these situations? She was like, no, you never really made promises. She was like, you know, whenever consequences came, you just took them because I'm a champion. And that's why. Because I was a good kid.
What happened?
And apparently, luckily for me,
You just never made promises.
yeah, that's because I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. But my sister, on the other hand, luckily, I was still given some more ammunition as if I already didn't have enough. My mom told me that my sister was that kind of person. Right? She was the promise maker. Very rarely the promise keeper, but the promise maker for sure. And it always had to do with like getting in trouble. Right? Like that's the way it tends to always go, is it's like you get caught doing something and you're like, Mom, Dad, I promise that I will never do this again if you let me off the hook this time. My mom liked to cave a lot on that. And so my sister ended up like basically blaming my mom for her getting away with stuff, which is like, nice. That always goes well. She did that as an adult, but my mom couldn't do anything, you know, later. But there's also the people who, they make promises to parents that really, it's almost like a bargaining chip. Like, it really just doesn't work that well, right? Like, when you think about it rationally, especially from the parent's perspective, it's never that good of a deal. Right? Like, Mom, if you'll take us to Disney World, I promise I'll clean my room every day, you know, for the whole month. And it's like, well, that's not a very good deal. Like, you should probably already be cleaning your room every day anyway. You know, like keeping it clean. So now I just have to pay for an all-expense-paid pass for you to go to Disney World. With my sister, it was always, you know, Mom, if you let me go to the party, if you let me, you know, be with my friends, if you let me just have this weekend, I promise I'll never make the same mistake again. And it's like, that's not a good deal. Like, real quick, if you're a teenager, if you're a kid, I'm going to teach you some bargaining, some tools of bargaining. You can never just say, you know, I promise I'm not going to do the thing that I shouldn't have done in the first place again. That's not really enough. Like, that's the whole point of the punishment. Like, if you're getting grounded because you talk back to your mom and dad, you can't be like, don't ground me and I promise I'll never do it again, because it's like you're kind of getting grounded so that you don't do it again. Like, come on, kids, like, learn how to bargain. Maybe, just maybe, you could get away with, Mom, I promise, you know, if you don't ground me, if you let me go out with my friends, I promise that I'll never talk back again, and I'll, you know, do the dishes without having to be asked, or I'll do it without, you know, ever complaining, because let's be honest, nobody likes to hear complainer. I know that because that's what people tell me when I complain all the time. I like to complain. There's just a lot to complain about, you know? Especially at my age. When you get to be my age, there's so many things going on, and you can just complain all the time.
Wait till you get my age.
I know. I wake up and my back hurts all the time, and I'm like, man, it's hard being 24. See, and here comes all the complaining, and nobody likes to hear it. But today I want us to look at a story in the book of Judges. You can go ahead and turn with me to Judges chapter 11. We're going to be looking at the story of Jephthah. Now, Jephthah, he makes a promise to God, and we're going to see the result of this promise. Just a caveat. There's this phrase that's been thrown around a lot, and for me, it was always tacky. My mom always said, "Never say this," so she's really going to throw a fit when I say it from the stage in church. It was the phrase, "swear to God." Right? Like, that's always been a taboo. Like, my mom always said, you never say that. In the Old Testament, that was actually a pretty common thing, was to make oaths to God, basically for God to kind of reward something, and in turn, you would do something in return for God. And so today we are going to look at one of the reasons why you should probably never make that promise, and two, we're going to look at why, if you do decide to say that phrase, you probably need to follow through on it. Because otherwise you're kind of spitting in the face of people like Jephthah who do actually follow through on that promise. And as we look at the next judge, we're going to see what happens when you don't follow through on the promises that you make to God. And it's bad. The consequences when you make promises and when you quote-unquote swear to God and then you don't follow through, those consequences tend to not go very well for you. And so we are going to be kind of looking at some of these situations. Now, in Judges chapter 11, we're coming to the story of Jephthah, and we are going to see some very interesting things about leadership as we walk through this story. So, if you have your Bibles, we're in Judges chapter 11. We're going to be starting in verse 1. And it says this. We can go ahead and start putting those on the board. Or not the board. This isn't the game show network. Like, show me Judges chapter 11. This is what it says. Jephthah the Gileadite was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute, and Gilead was his father. Gilead's wife bore him sons, and when they grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You will have no inheritance in our father's family, because you are the son of another woman." So in the land of Tob, really messed up there. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. Then some worthless men joined Jephthah and went on raids with him. Let's pause there. So that's pretty cool. I mean, really unfortunate when you think about it. We're going to see God work in Jephthah's life to redeem this trait. So what we have here is Jephthah is born from a prostitute. Now, if you know anything about the Old Testament, well, honestly, if you know anything about pretty much history, you know that prostitution is not like this super thing, it's not this thing to be super proud of. And so Jephthah is born through this unholy kind of bond. And so Jephthah also has a wife who bears sons, and these sons, they start to disown Jephthah. They're like, basically, you're worthless. You were born from somebody outside of our family. You are not a legitimate heir to our father, and so you will receive no inheritance. And so Jephthah decides to run away from home, and he gets these worthless men that join him. So it's almost like Jephthah's kind of like started up this gang. Like, sort of this street gang. They go on raids, they're robbing people, they're living this life of sin. And as we read on, we're going to see God start to redeem this man. Picking up in verse 4, it says this: "Sometime later, the Ammonites fought against Israel. When the Ammonites made war with Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. They said to him, 'Come, be our commander, and let's fight the Ammonites.' Jephthah replied to the elders of Gilead, 'Don't you hate me? Or didn't you hate me and drive me out of my father's family? Why then have you come to me now in your trouble?' They answered Jephthah, 'That's true, but now we turn to you. Come with us, fight the Ammonites, and you will become leader of all the inhabitants of Gilead.' So Jephthah said to them, 'If you are bringing me back to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them to me, I will be your leader.' The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, 'The Lord is our witness if we don't do as you say.' So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead. The people made him their leader and commander, and Jephthah repeated all his terms in the presence of the Lord at Mizpah." So here we have Jephthah, this gang member, this highwayman, this guy who was just completely shunned from his people. But he's a really strong warrior, and so in their time of need, they come back to him and they say, "Hey, please help us out." And Jephthah's response is, "Wait a second, didn't you just kick me out because of who I was? It wasn't even my character that you kicked me out for. It wasn't because of who I was as a person. It's because of who I belong to. You said that I wasn't even worth being a part of your family. Now you want me to come back and lead you." And they said, "Yeah, sorry, we made a mistake. Probably shouldn't have done that." And so we see God start to work in Jephthah's life to put him in a position of leadership. And it brings us to our first point, which is this. Let me put that up. God can redeem even the lowest of people. Jephthah was an illegitimate son. He had no right to the inheritance of his father. He was shunned by his siblings. He was kicked from his home. He was a raider. He hurt people. He robbed. He was what we might call in our society a nobody. Thief, gang member, criminal. God steps in to redeem him, despite his bad qualities. Now, we're going to kind of jump ahead in this story a little bit. Jephthah starts to have these issues with the Ammonites, which, I mean, it's kind of the point. That's why the elders brought him back, so that he could go to war with the Ammonites. And we're going to see Jephthah swear an oath to God, and the result of this oath. Now, I want to warn you, this is not like one of those things. This is not one of those light-hearted promises that people kind of just half-heartedly throw out. This is like a really serious thing. And what's important that I want us to recognize is that nowhere in the text that we are about to read is he called to make this promise. This is poor judgment on his part where he makes a promise, a really dumb promise, and he is still called to honor his oath to God. And so we're going to jump ahead to verse 29. And it says this: "The Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah, who traveled through Gilead and Manasseh, and then through Mizpah of Gilead. He crossed over to the Ammonites from Mizpah of Gilead. Jephthah made this vow to the Lord: if you in fact hand over the Ammonites to me, whoever comes out the doors of my house to greet me, when I return safely from the Ammonites, will belong to the Lord, and I will offer that person as a burnt sacrifice." Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord handed them over to him. He defeated 20 of their cities with a great slaughter from Aroer all the way to the entrance of Minnith and to Abel Keram. So the Ammonites were subdued before the Israelites. So, we're going to pause there. Jephthah makes this kind of half-cocked plan that if God will truly deliver on the promise that he's already been given, he will sacrifice whoever comes out of his front door. Now, that word whoever is pretty important, because this is not like if my pig comes out of the front door, or if my dog comes out of the front door, or, if my cow comes out of the front door. This is a whoever. Now, the Bible makes it very clear that God is opposed to burnt sacrifices of people, not burnt sacrifices of animals. He is opposed to human sacrifices. Jephthah wrongfully decides that he's going to sacrifice a person in order to try to appease God. And God is going to use this as a lesson, one, to Jephthah, and two, to the people of Israel, that they need to take their promises very carefully. They need to think through what they say. Picking up in verse 34, it says this: "When Jephthah went to his home in Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with tambourines and dancing. She was his only child. He had no other son or daughter besides her. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, 'No, not my daughter. You have devastated me. You have brought great misery on me. I have given my word to the Lord and cannot take it back.'" So, in a moment of weakness and faithlessness, Jephthah makes this half-cocked promise to God to sacrifice whoever comes out of his house. Upon his victorious return, upon his return in glory, he will sacrifice whoever comes out of his house, and the first thing that comes out of his house is his own daughter and his only child. I don't have the verses up there, but as the rest of the chapter unfolds, we see that Jephthah's daughter is willing to honor the promise that her father made. Despite how horrible and tragic and honestly kind of stupid as an idea as it was, she decides to honor it. And we find out in verse 39 that Jephthah follows through on his promise. Jephthah sacrifices his daughter as a burnt offering due to his initial faithlessness, that God would work through him. this brings us to both our second and third point. We can go and put up the next one. Think through your promises. There are so many people who want to make these promises to God. Oftentimes it comes in a place of faithlessness, a place of worry, a place of doubt, fear. God, if you would just take away the cancer, I promise that I will never do X again. God, if you would just heal my loved one, I promise that I will never take another sip of alcohol again. God, if you would just do this, I promise that I will never sin again. I promise that I will never do this. And everybody, a lot of people, we like to make these kind of half-cocked decisions that we are going to never do whatever it is in order to appease God, and then we quickly get caught in a promise that we can't keep. And so that brings us to our third point. If you make a promise to God, be sure to honor it. Honor that promise. Whatever it is. So, if your promise is, God, if you would just take away the cancer, I will go into ministry. And if that cancer goes away, you go into ministry. If you make a promise that you're never going to touch whatever drug again, you follow through on that promise. In this story, we don't get to see the dire consequences of people not following through on promises. But our next story, we're going to be looking at Samson. We're going to be seeing the consequences of what it looks like to break into a house. So, in the spirit of Jephthah, whatever promise you decide to make to God, if you decide to swear to God about something, you might want to follow it through. Because Jephthah did, and it literally cost him his own child. Godly leaders, one, have faith in the Lord, and two, they follow through on their promises to God. No matter how difficult, no matter if it's even a dumb idea to make this kind of a promise in the first place, they follow through. They are a man or a woman of their word. What they say, they do. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day that you've given us. God, I thank you for Jephthah's story. God, that we can look and see that you are faithful. God, as we look at the judges, we see how time and time and time again you work through the people that you call. God, I pray that we would just think through promises very clearly. God, that as we try to navigate your will for our life, that we're not just making these half-hearted promises that we're not willing to follow through on. God, I pray that you would allow us to be people of our word. That what we say we'll do, we will actually do. God, we thank you that you redeem people people even as low as Jephthah. God, because that means that you can redeem even us. God, that you can work through our tragic past, work through our history, to provide us with your future. God, we thank you for your Son, sacrificing